We've heard a lot about St. Paul, the gospel communicator, so far during this conference, but how do we weave that into our everyday lives in the 21st century? We're going to be looking at that now, and we're going to hear from Jesuit Father Richard Leonard. Father Leonard is well known in the Australian Church as Director of the Australian Catholic Office for Film and Broadcasting. He's a visiting Professor of Communications at the Pontifical Gregorian University, Rome, and is an Honorary Fellow of the Australian Catholic University. He's also the author of The Mystical Gaze of the Cinema, the films of Peter Weir, Movies That Matter, reading film through the lens of faith, and Preaching to the Converted. Well, he's certainly here today to talk to us on the subject of communicating the good news today. Father Richard Leonard.
Whether we like it or not, and whether it's fair or not, I think we need to own up right up front and just come out and say it. Poor old St. Paul suffers from an image problem. We hear a lot more about St. Peter than St. Paul, and mainly because Peter features regularly in jokes about arriving in heaven. I know of only one joke about poor old St. Paul, where the school children got rather confused about Paul's life and wrote in their final exam that St. Paul converted to Christianity, that he preached holy acrimony, which is another name for marriage. St. Paul taught that a Christian should only have one wife, which is called monotony. And in the end, the natives of Macedonia did not believe in Paul, so he got stoned. Because I'm not a biblical scholar, I will not be speaking about the person or writings of St. Paul. Even I know when to shut up. But I would like to reflect with you on what challenges his witness provides for us in Australia today. And for our international guests right now who are with us for this seminar, I'm sorry, but I hope that this process that we'll apply to Australia, the process will also have something to say to your own particular social and cultural milieu. You see, there are two facets to Paul's ministry that I think we need to take seriously and to recover urgently. The first is that he got off his backside and went to where people were. All too often today, people in the church can act as though we have every right to wait for the world to come to us on our terms, walking our walk and talking our talk. Nothing very Pauline about that. If the last year has a lasting legacy, may it be that we recover the best sense of mission in the church to go out to the world and proclaim the saving love of Jesus Christ. The second facet of St. Paul's ministry I hope we recover urgently is taking seriously the local culture within which we proclaim the good news. I'm sure many of us have been to those conferences on Christian evangelization where nearly the entire time has been taken up with speaking about the church rather than the world. If we take Paul's witness on board, I suggest the opposite approach might be the better way. Why? Paul's letters almost always attend to real-life communities undergoing real-life problems in the world of their day. Paul was a genius in guiding them through a radically changing theological, political, and social landscape. His words had a particular power because he knew his audience and he understood the social milieu in which they were all coming to fullness of faith in Jesus Christ. Although written well after Paul had died, Luke, in his second volume, gives us Paul's speech before the Areopagus. Initially, we're told that Paul was deeply distressed to see the city so full of idols, but he didn't get stuck in being distressed about the world he confronted. Rather, we're told in Acts 17 that he goes on to commend the Athenians for being extremely religious in every way. For as I went through your city, I found an altar to an unknown God, and what therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you today. It may be argued that this presentation of Paul clashes with some of the style which emerges from his own writings, but I think we can see a consistency in Paul's desire to find a way to proclaim Christ to all people everywhere. Whatever of its history, this event has been the touchstone of the Church's sanest approaches to enculturation and evangelization. And I think we need to be just as clever and courageous in going out to our world and proclaiming to our compatriots the good news we've come to know and believe. So let's start by not immediately being frightened or suspicious of the world. And then let's ponder what we might have to say to them and what they need and want to hear of the gospel at this time, in this place. Although what follows is a snapshot rather than any scientific outline, it's a fascinating insight into the very community to which we're sent in Australia right now. From last year's census and other reputable surveys, we know that this is a profile of the average Australian. The average Australian is 37 years of age. They lived together before they got married. That's 71% of all people who are getting married in Australia right now have lived together before they get married. They got married at 31 by a civil marriage celebrant. 64% of all marriages now occur in this country not before a minister, a priest, or any other religious figure, but civilly, before a civil marriage celebrant, often in a place of nature. They'll most probably not divorce. 34.3% of all first marriages break up in divorce, which means you have a 2/3% chance of staying married to the same person for the rest of your life. And we have 1.7 children. That's the average, 1.7 children. And they're increasingly unbaptized, except when they turn 4.5. And for those of us in Catholic education, I wonder why. But it's important to note something here. If we're going to talk about evangelization and we're not talking baptism, marriage, and funeral, we're not serious. If we want to talk to a wide collection of our community about the things of God, the greatest moment our church touches a wide cross-section of the Australian community is when we're hatching, matching, and dispatching. And I have a simple rule about this. I baptize anything that moves. I marry anything that moves, and I bury anything that doesn't. And I leave the rest up to amazing grace, because these are moments that Christ can take his own sacraments and take those people and the community gathered to celebrate those events into living and proclaiming the good news we've all come to celebrate. Right at the moment, we have the average Australian has $304,000 mortgage on one of the largest houses in which Australians have ever lived. We've never had smaller families. We've never built bigger houses. We're worth $498,000 all up, and we carry $4,100 a debt in monthly credit card debt. Per capita population, Australia are the largest credit card debtors in the world. We lose $18 a week gambling, which works out to be $936 a year. If you didn't gamble that much last year, and I didn't, there are a terrific number of our compatriots who are making up for us. And it's a wonder today we didn't have a raffle rather than just give away a prize. We donated $3.90 to charity a week last year, which is only $202.80 a year. I hope someone from Denmark is with us right now, because take a bow, Denmark. They're the most generous country in the world towards third world giving. They give, in comparison to our $202, $649 per Dane. What's the number one selling product in an Australian home? It's a new kitchen. We're ripping out kitchens like they're going out of fashion right now. And we can actually show that the rise in the cooking shows led to new kitchens. That when we looked at Jamie Oller and the Two Fat Ladies and Delia Smith and all of the others, we didn't say, boy, I must cook that souffle tomorrow night for the family. We looked at the benches, the tops, the range and the oven and said, Harry, we're getting a new kitchen. That's fine, except that the day that we finish the new kitchen, that night to celebrate, we'll go out for dinner. We watch 3 hours and 13 minutes of television a day, which doesn't sound like very much. Come home at 6, turn off the telly at 13 past 9. There's the daily average. But that means a person born right now who gets to their 70th birthday has spent 9 whole calendar years of their life in front of the TV. If the Christian church is not talking media, it's not serious. We have someone in our family who is chronically depressed. How do we answer the question, how are you? We normally have 2 stock replies. We're going to say really busy, frantic, or run off my feet, or we're exhausted. In fact, I have a friend of mine who has to be the busiest person he knows. When I say, how are you? He'll say, when he says to me, how are you? I'll say, I'm busy actually, been busy lately. He'll say, you're busy? You're busy. I'm so frantic that I'm absolutely exhausted. I'm run off my feet. And I say, if this is a competition, you can win. We enjoy watching American fantasy and science fiction films, which aren't explicitly sexy. They have medium-level violence and medium-level coarse language. Can we stop saying that only sex and violence sells at the cinema? It doesn't. If you want to make a very successful film in Western society these days, make a family comedy, often an animation, or a science fantasy film. They're the 2 big ones that sell very well. And on television, we love sitcoms, sport, so-called reality, and lifestyle programs. We have ready access now to soft or hardcore pornography via DVD, online, or in magazines. We wonder why sometimes it's difficult for our message about Christian sexual ethics to get out, because the entire culture in which we're proclaiming it has now dramatically changed underneath our feet. We read 3 magazines in Australia, Woman's Weekly, Woman's Day, and No Idea. We have 2 big books, The Da Vinci Code and Harry Potter, but my favourite one in there is the #1 selling book after the Bible in Australian publishing history is in fact the Living Parish Hymnal. Some of us would remember it. #1, now thank we all our God. #3, praise to the Lord, the Almighty, the King of creation. I'm not doing bingo, by the way, but nonetheless it's interesting that for all of the 60s, the 2nd biggest selling book after the Bible in Australian publishing history is our own hymnal. We own an iPod, we have 3 TVs, and we're moving over to the internet at the rate of knots and to pay TV. We attend a movie once a month. Our children, 10 to 18-year-olds, of course, are online. 2.5 hours a day they're online. And we trust governments and media outlets to tell us the truth, which is okay, except if that's the only source of information, major media outlets, we could be getting a skewed perception of what's right. Now this stuff matters because we can't effectively evangelize a culture we don't know, or worse still, one we actually despise. Like St. Paul, we don't have to canonize our culture, just start by knowing it well enough to engage with it effectively in building bridges from the gospel to the real lives of those who need to hear Christ's saving message. So what are we offering? An aging population who is not coming to church, has a small family, a large mortgage, is under financial pressure, spends enormous amounts of time consuming popular media in all its forms, and complains of being frantic and exhausted. I think St. Paul's witness holds 4 elements we need to reclaim: courage, adaptability, right judgment, and unity through love. I'll say a word about each. Courage. We may not be winning any public popularity contests in this country right now, but we do not have to think that the world is always opposed to our Christian message. When the church lives out the core of Christ's message in our mission and ministry, then the world quietly takes notice of us. Maybe the time has come for us to have the courage to remind Australia that even given all the many and sometimes very serious problems that beset us, the Catholic community does in fact walk the talk every day. Outside government, we are the largest provider of education, healthcare, and welfare today. We have 670,000 children in Catholic education right now. We have 66 hospitals with almost 9,000 beds. We have 21,500 residential aged care beds in the church's hands. Over 1 million people were cared for in 2008 through the network of Catholic Welfare Australia. The St Vincent de Paul, not the Salvation Army, with all due respect to the Sallies and a wonderful group they are, but it's the SVDP who are the largest and most extensive volunteer welfare network in the country. And we could fill the MCG 7 times last Sunday with mass-going Catholics. If the AFL can do it once, they're delirious. We could do it right now with the 690,000 people who go to Mass every Sunday, including 125,000 of them who are between the ages of 12 to 25. I think we need to bring these facts into the light, not to glorify ourselves, but to do as St. Paul tells us, to boast in the Lord. For this is what we believe Christ is achieving in and through us. Secondly, adaptability. One of the striking features of St. Paul's proclamation is that it was focused on a personal relationship with Christ. I think we need to let go of the idea that we're selling a product. What we're offering our compatriots is a relationship, a loving, liberating, and saving relationship with Christ and with the community that gathers in His name. And there are 2 ways we could promote this relationship. The first is to use all forms of popular media we can to speak about the things of God. That's why this eConference is such a wonderfully groundbreaking moment. And I think we need to let go of our suspicion that we're let go of our suspicion of media that entertains. Because often we can think we can't use the popular media because the things of God, we say, require too much seriousness, too much nuance. Well, Paul, in the way that he used the media of his day, understood that the most important lessons could be learnt through clear and accessible communication. And he also knew the art of communicating his message directly and often simply. The Church has commendably been a custodian of high artistic culture. We don't need to abandon that legacy from our past, but marry it now with the popular culture which now forms the vast majority of people to whom we're sent. In some respects, the Church has become too serious for its own good. Even though Paul was originally distressed at what he saw in Athens, he didn't get trapped into simply being a carping critic. He found a way to affirm what he could and start from there. We need to make sure that we do not fulfill the Christian stereotype as being defined by all the things of which we don't approve and don't like. I think we have to, right judgment is the third point I want to make. By being as affirming as we can, it doesn't mean we should desist with right judgment. In fact, emulating St. Paul, I wish we would stop saying the phrase, don't judge. We can't judge them, they can't judge us, we're in no position to judge. What I assume we're trying to say here is don't condemn. But there's a world of difference between condemnation and judgment. And the sort of judgment we're called to is the same we see in Jesus and even in some of St. Paul. It's compassionate judgment. There is not a page of the Gospels within which the Lord is not judging, but He never condemns. The whole idea that people say to us, you're a Christian, you can't judge anybody, I think is nonsense. We have to stand for something or we'll fall for anything. But like Paul, we don't have to abandon our principles and our beliefs, but we might have to pray that we do even better than him in responding to complex people in complex situations. Paul was a saint. He wasn't perfect. And like him, we need to keep working to emulate Jesus, who embodied in everything he did and said, judgment with compassion. Finally, unity through love. One of the greatest challenges Paul struggled with in his day, and we struggle with now, is disagreeing with one another charitably and being one in Christ. It's not that Paul didn't mind a decent stoush. As we know from various parts of the letters, he could be blunt. And in Galatians, we have Paul recounting how he fronted Peter and the other apostles and telling them in no uncertain terms that they were wrong about whom Christ was calling into the kingdom. What makes Peter's leadership, of course, so outstanding is that he not only listened carefully to what Paul said, but he saw that what Christ was doing among the Gentiles. He trusted that the workings of the Spirit was bigger than he was, and that it included a man who had never met Jesus, who had been healed of being a murderer of Christians, or at least presiding over their murder, and who went on to have one of the greatest insights into where and how Christ was to be preached. That takes a loving humility, which we need right now. As just one example, I think that there are some Catholic blogging sites and Catholic comment columns working right now in our church that destroys the unity and love we're called to have in the body of Christ. I think this is especially true where, under a cloak of anonymity, some people say libelous and manifestly uncharitable things about other Catholics and Christians. Whether we're liberal or conservative in the church or somewhere in between, I don't think it matters. If we follow Paul's lead, then at very least we should put a name to what we say and say it in such a way that works for unity, for faith, for hope, and for love. As St. Augustine said, in essentials unity, in doubt liberty, and in all things charity. If we can exercise that sort of witness in the world, especially in regard to people we think are wrong or are in error or with whom we disagree, then we might be a more attractive community than we are right now. None of us is for Paul or for Apollos or for Cephas. We all belong to Christ, and Christ belongs to God. So, like St. Paul, let's go out to our world with faith. Let's go out with courage, adaptability, right judgment, and unity through love. But for Christ's sake, let's get going. Thank you.